All right, welcome to this week's episode of the JJ Redick Podcast with Tommy Alter. This week we are joined by Indiana Pacers guard Malcolm Brogdon. Malcolm, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Appreciate you having me, man.
For sure. First of all, you have, I think you have a really unique perspective on a lot of things happening right now. You're very outspoken. You spoke at a protest in Atlanta a couple of weeks ago. Your family has a long lineage of activists. So I want to hear your thoughts on some of the stuff happening in the country right now. But in regards to the NBA, you're also on the executive committee of our union. And so I think you have a good feel for what's happening right now. So this is the first pod we've done since it's been officially announced that we're coming back. And in just a week or so that they've announced that, there already seems to be a little bit of unrest amongst some players.
For sure. Sort of to touch on that, it's exciting that we're coming back. I'm really looking forward to it. I think, though, with sort of what's going on in the background between COVID and health issues, but also sort of the civil unrest and the Black community, but also just in the country as a whole, I think we're going to have a lot of guys that have mixed opinions, mixed views on whether or not they'll come back, whether they'll come back and they'll sit out, whether they're going to demonstrate. I think we're going to have guys sort of all across the spectrum. So it's definitely going to be interesting. But I think sort of the background of all this, COVID hits, and then, all this stuff after happens with, in the Black community, police brutality, the Mr. Floyd's death. I think what people are honestly leaving out when they look at all this is that we are still going through a pandemic worldwide. And I think that sort of paints the picture, and it puts more pressure on the situation. So people would not be as desperate. People would not be as much in a crisis mode if COVID wasn't going on. So that sort of exacerbates the situation. But then you have, the death of another Black man, basically the murder on the street of another Black man. And it sparks outrage in the Black community. But now you see allies coming from all different races coming together to support us, which I think is the best thing possible. I think it had to come to a head. It had to come to this point to really spark change. And I think now we're starting to see that. It's going to take years and years to fully get past systematic racism and systematic oppression. But, we're starting. I think we're at the, a turning point in terms of people coming together and us having allies.
For sure. When you went to the protests in Atlanta, just observationally, what was sort of the race demographics of the people there?
I would say about in the protests that we were in, Jaylen led it. He did an amazing job leading that protest. Jaylen Brown. I would say it was about 70% Black, 20 to 25% white, and then the rest were maybe Hispanic, Asian. But as in my head, as I pictured a protest going, I thought that was the best peaceful protest could go in terms of the demographics of people that showed up.
Sure. Quickly back to the NBA stuff. One of the things in the last 24 hours, there's this report that Woj came out with where the PA and the league are trying to figure out sort of what is the recourse if guys don't want to show up. And it sounds like maybe that will be an option for certain guys. What do you know about that? I've talked to a few guys that are, super interested in sitting out possibly. And at the end of the day, I was actually talking to Chris Paul the other day, and he said, man, this is a decision. This is an individual decision that every man has to make for himself. And I think that's exactly what it is. It depends on your perspective. Some guys are going to say, for health reasons and the COVID and the long-term effects that we don't understand about COVID, I want to sit out. Other guys are going to say, the Black community and my people are going through too much for me to basically be distracted with basketball. I'm not going to prioritize this over my, the Black community. I'm going to sit out. And then there's another group of guys that are going to say no. And these are all, I think, black perspectives. Another group of guys are going to say, no, this is the most amount of money I'm going to make in my lifetime. It doesn't make sense to hand this money back. I can do so much good in my community if I have this money. So I think it's a matter of perspective. I think guys are gathering to really talk about and dive deep into the idea of not playing. But it's something, if my thing is, if you're going to sit out, you have to have demands. You have to have policies that you want to see change. You have to, there has to be something very organized and strategized to go into that.
Do you think that by playing, it sort of amplifies your voice in a way? I guess there's two sides to this. Like, you could sit out and come up with some policies that enact change and get some help from the league and from the owners, and then not play. Or you could play, and while that's ongoing, every camera, every microphone, we're going to be on TV every day. There's nothing else going on in the country in regards to sports. So there could be an opportunity, if guys decide to play, to use that to further amplify themselves.
Absolutely. For guys that take the perspective of I'd rather play, I think that's a better fit for myself. If that's what guys are thinking, it is, in terms of you have more of a voice, you have more of a platform. Everybody's going to be watching us. Like you said, we have all the cameras. There are no other sports going on. Everybody wants us to play right now. And that means everybody's going to be watching. There are only 22 teams that are going to be there. And then as you go, if your team advances to the second round or to the playoffs, the second round, third round, actually the attention on you and your platform, it actually grows at the farther you stay in Orlando. So that's definitely a perspective I want guys to think about and understand before they make a decision.
This is sort of a technical question for both of you, but how does it work in terms of when guys make the decision, say they make the decision to sit out? Is there a deadline where it's like, okay, you have to decide by July 10th or something like that, like whether you're coming? Or is it a rolling thing where you could decide the day before, you know what, I'm not comfortable, I want out, and then everybody just sort of deals with it?
I don't know what JJ is going to say, but in my opinion, I think that's something that the NBPA first has to communicate with the players, and they have to come to a decision on what they think is best, whether there should be a deadline or shouldn't. And then that decision, they should organize that, and then that decision should be taken to Adam Silver. And that's when the NBA and the PA, basically the players, are able to negotiate what's the best outcome. Because at the end of the day, like you said, the Woj article came out, and we saw that, there might be a rule where guys can sit out. They might not be paid for those games, but they may give guys the ability to sit out. So it is something I think that the NBA is aware of, but it just has to be handled the right way.
I want to get your just perspective on just the idea of sort of living in this bubble and living in this quarantine for, you guys are a playoff team already, so you guys are going to be there for over 2 months. And what your thoughts are on going to Orlando and just being completely isolated for that long?
It's crazy, bro. Honestly, it's crazy.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So, but honestly, I'm not sure. There's a piece of me that's like, man, it's sort of going to be dope. It's sort of, having the best players in the world all in one city, on one campus, all around each other. And it's going to be back like in the AAU days where you sit after you watch another game, but it's the best players in the world. You're watching each other every night. But then there's a piece where I think a lot of us are people that want to travel, people that want to get out. I know you're a wine guy. I talk to TJ McConnell a lot.
Yeah.
People want to go out and experience different things like we do on our daily lives, and we're not really going to be able to do that. It still will be a quarantined, very confined environment. So it's going to be interesting. I think we're going to get a little claustrophobic, but I also think it'll be a cool experience that we'll look back and be like, man, we were a part of that group. We were in the NBA during that time. So I'm
sure there's going to be some wild stories. Despite I just know how our league is. Like, some shit's going to happen. Some shit's going to happen.
Too many personalities.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, it's it. You guys are you're going to be living through history. No matter how it goes, you're going to be living through history, which is sort of it's like sort of a daunting thing to think about when you're walking into it, but it just is. It's a one of one situation.
Yeah.
I think for me, I know this is true. And for a lot of guys that I've talked to with families, they're a little hesitant about this, obviously, because they don't want to be away from their families for 2 months. I don't want to be away from my family and not see them at all for 2 months. But also with everything going on in our country, just feeling, I think, a little uneasy about while there is civil unrest, not being in a physical location with your family, I think is scary for a lot of guys. It's scary for me.
Yeah, no, and I don't have a family like that yet, but I can't imagine being away from them for that period of time and them not being able to visit, but also while a pandemic is going on and all this civil unrest. I mean, there's so many things to consider when you're leaving your family during this time. It can be overwhelming, I'm sure.
I think one of the other really interesting things about this whole experience is going to be, as a player, what the fuck is it going to be like playing in front of nobody? And especially once you get to the playoffs, because one of the reasons the playoffs is so amazing is because the second you come out for pregame shooting or pregame warmups, there's a buzz in the gym. There's a different atmosphere,
a lot of the time,
and we feed off that. And then the fans feed off us, and you get these incredible moments in the playoffs. And I wonder how that's gonna play out, especially as we get deeper and deeper in the playoffs.
I think about it when people are watching on TV, they're really going to hear all the talking that goes on the court. Yeah. And I'm actually interested to see the articles that come out about that and the sort of the chatter from fans and the world about the actual things we're saying on the court, whether it's, about the game, whether it's not, whatever profanity, whatever it is. It's just going to be interesting because people are actually going to be able to dial in and I think actually gain a deeper understanding of what we're thinking, what we're talking about. They're really going to be able to hear the details of the game.
Do you to your point, JJ, do you feel like momentum goes out the window with with things like fans? If you're in a series, for example, you're not all the expectations of everybody else in the building is gone. So it's just basketball. At the end of the day, it's just basketball. And so the way you're even thinking about approaching the game is very different if you're not walking into like an opposing arena down 3-1, knowing what they're expecting and everything.
Yeah, I think that's one of the tough things about this, especially if you're a team that has secured home court advantage for first round, second round, third, throughout the playoffs, whatever it may be. I know last year you guys were the number 1 seed in the East, right?
Yeah.
Malcolm, with Milwaukee. And so you had an advantage at the beginning of every series, knowing that you were going to get 4 games at home. And I don't know. I'm wondering if there's something the league or the PA can come up with that sort of gives those teams somewhat of a competitive advantage, other than maybe giving them like a better hotel room. Is there anything that's on the table right now?
So I've heard, giving the home court advantage team or the team with a better record the ball in the first 3 quarters. At the beginning of each quarter, giving them the ball, stuff like that. I just don't see it. There's nothing you can't make up for not having your fans and not being in your city.
Yeah.
There's nothing to that level that you can make up for. But there is something to say for teams that have battled and played well all season and earned those top 4 spots. They should be rewarded for that. We're going to have to be creative, and the NBA is going to have to be creative on how they structure that.
Yeah. One other thing about this, I'm struggling a little bit because I want to play more than anything. I love playing. It's what I think about all day long. It's just, I think it's hard to sort of disassociate from everything else going on right now and sort of mentally lock into what normally is like a very fulfilling and enjoyable job and have it be under these circumstances. There's this weird sort of battle internally that I'm dealing with right now. I don't know if you've really experienced that a little bit.
Yeah, it's like basketball is for a lot of NBA guys, it's our sanctuary. It's where we can go and we can not think about anything. But now there's so much going on, and what's going on is so much bigger than basketball.
Sure.
It's going to be hard to actually. It is. Even if we do lock in, it's going to be hard to lock in. It's going to be hard to focus completely as you would during the season while we're down there in Orlando, because we know the whole world is on hold. It's on pause. The economy. We know all this stuff is going on. So it's definitely going to be hard to lock in.
Yeah. Speaking of what's going on, I want to get to some stuff about the civil unrest and everything happening with the social justice movement. As I mentioned before, you spoke in Atlanta at a protest rally. But I was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal about you, and you actually come from a long lineage of activists. So for the listener, just kind of explain your incredible family history.
For sure. So it really starts with my grandfather, John Hurst Adams. He passed a few years ago, but he was amazing. He marched in the civil rights. He was an AME bishop for over 20 years, which if you know anything about the civil rights, the AME church was very central, and it was the central church during the civil rights. But he led marches and protests in Seattle, in Los Angeles. As far as the civil rights go, every city basically had their leaders. He was the leader in those two cities for years, leading protests and marches that, were organized by Dr. King and organized by all these Andrew Young, all these great leaders that were here in the South and Memphis, Atlanta. So they were all coordinated together. My grandfather marched at Selma. He was a very instrumental piece, I think, in the civil rights. He wasn't, on the front line with Dr. King, but he had a big role and he played it well. I think now the legacy is being handed down. And, my cousin Kamal Massad, he just graduated from Harvard Business School, and he actually just co-authored an article called African Americans, Racial Inequality in the United States. And it basically is a succinct overview of racial inequality for Black people in the States since slavery. And now it's getting a lot of buzz. It just has gone viral. But it's super informative. If you're ever looking for something that can outline, all these terms like redlining, voter suppression, all these things we see nowadays, where it comes from and where the origins are, that's really what the article is about. So that's sort of my cousin's way of, holding the legacy and continuing it. My way is using my platform. So of course, what I do now is not going to be, as impactful as what my grandfather, Dr. King, did in the civil rights. But I think as young Black men, we can take messages, we can take, learning techniques from them and sort of transfer into what we're doing right now. And that's what I'm trying to do.
And Tommy and I we'll find that article and we'll tweet it out when we post this, so the listener can find that. Did your grandfather ever speak to you directly about these issues and about what he experienced during the civil rights movement?
When you talk to a lot of people that marched and were in that era, they're never boastful. They're never people that talk about it a lot. They sort of keep to themselves about it. And I also think there's a lot about it that was traumatic for them. Being hosed, having your head beat in during those sit-ins at the restaurant, stuff like that is not stuff that they'll bring up. But of course, I would talk to my grandfather about the marches. And when I was a young kid, me and my brothers, when we were young, you don't understand how important or how amazing, an adult is in your life, especially a grandparent. You take them for granted. And it wasn't until I got to college where I actually did some research and I realized how amazing he was. But of course, he told us stories. And he had a memory that was so amazing. He remembered people's names. He remembered details of an event. So he could tell stories and it felt like you were actually there. So of course he told stories, and it was always an experience when he opened up about his, what went on.
Did you ever get a chance to meet any of his friends from the movement or anything like that? Any of the people that he marched with? Absolutely.
So my grandmother, who is still here, living here in Atlanta, grew up with who was she is the wife of my grandfather. Just to clarify, she grew up with Andrew Young, Ambassador Andrew Young, and Uncle. We call him Uncle Andy because he's super close to the family. He would be at all the Christmas dinners, all the Thanksgiving, all these dinners, all these parties, and I never knew how amazing he was. He's truly amazing. Wasn't the ambassador for the UN. And, really was super, super instrumental in the civil rights with Dr. King, was his right-hand man, him and John Lewis.
Yeah.
So it's, being with him and having that experience of, talking through these situations and their strategies and how they organized and, strategize. It's truly amazing, and it's a blessing for me to be in this situation. It's just like, how was I born into this family with people that did such amazing things? So,
well, Atlanta as a city, and I'm not sure if all of our listeners sort of know this about it as a city, but Atlanta has just such an amazing history of this throughout its history. I mean, obviously, Dr. King is from Atlanta originally, but you mentioned John Lewis. Like, I look at John Lewis as he's like one of the true living American heroes right now. In terms of just what he's been through, what he's done since he got to Congress. He's still, even now, he has cancer and he's fighting through it, and he's still showing up to work every day. How do you think that Atlanta sort of shaped you in that way?
Atlanta's played a giant role. I'm not sure there's another city in the country that Black people see as much opportunity for themselves as Atlanta. This is a place where Black people travel from all over the country to live and to grow, to evolve, because they know their opportunities. They know there are a lot of Black people in Atlanta that are doing really well. So it's sort of expected. As a Black man, you can go a lot of places and you're sort of shocked that, especially coming from Atlanta, you're sort of shocked in other places like Black people are really still struggling here. You don't see a lot of Black people doing well. Because in Atlanta, it's not like that. You see Black people at every different socioeconomic class. So growing up as a child, you understand, we are supposed to do well. We are equal. We can be great as well. And that's sort of the beauty of Atlanta, and they embrace you. Atlanta embraces Black people, and I think they're continuing to get better.
I wanted to ask you about one of your experiences growing up as a Black person in this country. That's very, I guess, not unique for a Black person, but when you got your first car, you had to sign a contract with your mom, I believe.
My grandfather.
Grandfather. Can you just explain that contract?
For sure. We had a family car. It was my grandfather's car he got maybe in the 90s. It was a green Toyota Avalon. By the time I got it, it was beat up, but each of my brothers drove it. I have two older brothers. So when the car got to me, I didn't realize it, but my grandfather made both of my brothers basically sign a contract of how we would conduct ourselves if we were pulled over by the police. Because in the Black community, when you're pulled over by the police, the goal is not to argue a ticket. The goal is to get home alive. We are comprehending something that's completely different. And that's what the contract was for. It was for, basically putting your hands on the steering wheel, not trying to be argumentative, not trying to talk about your rights as a human being and as a citizen. It was simply to defer and to get home safely. So we would all sign a contract before we could. My grandfather would hand over his car to us and basically agree to the terms of acting in the right way when the police pull you over.
It's so, in his mind, it was just all about de-escalation in that scenario.
And that's a problem. That in the Black community, we have to teach our kids to de-escalate, our children to de-escalate a situation with an adult authority that has a weapon. It's so backwards, it's so wrong. And that's something that has to change. Our children cannot be targets. We can't be targets because of the color of our skin.
And to your point about privilege, white people cannot comprehend that.
Right.
They just cannot. They can't understand it.
Yeah,
I think it's a lot of the time I see a lot of white people, or I've heard experiences with police where they're arguing over the ticket. Their goal when they get pulled over by the police is, how can I get out of this ticket? And for a Black person, they're already. Well, I'm in the NBA, but when I get pulled over by the police, my heart is racing. I'm sweating a little bit because I've seen the videos too many times. And unless I'm in Indianapolis or Atlanta and the police officer recognizes me, I could be in serious trouble. So it's something that every Black male, it doesn't matter what level of privilege he's at, has to take serious.
Didn't one of your teammates in Milwaukee have an incident with an officer?
He did. Sterling Brown, he got pulled over. He was basically parked in two spaces. He was at a CVS, not super late at night, but, after it was dark. And he came out of the CVS and the cops had, they called, one of the cops pulled up and was harassing him about how he was parked. And he was just saying, can I just go home? And then he called 3 or 4 more cars, and they ended up pinning him to the ground. And he said, "I'm Sterling Brown. I play for the Milwaukee Bucks." They didn't listen, so that clearly didn't work. But when you go back and you look at the video, when he says that, there are 2 or 3 cops that step out of the camera once he says that. But the cops that have him pinned down to the ground and that have bruised up his face, they basically aren't paying attention. They didn't hear him say that or didn't care, and they still have him pinned. But yeah, no, that's just a situation, man, where it can happen to literally anybody. If you're Black, you're a target. That's just what it is.
Jesus fucking Christ.
Yeah.
Are you hopeful that that sort of this time around, whatever that means, but this time, this movement that's happening right now, are you hopeful that maybe this will be different? That this will be sort of the real change that I think we're all hoping actually happens?
Absolutely. I think there are a lot of people that have lost hope, which honestly I understand. People that say don't vote, people that say people that would rather sit back and just let things happen to them. That's not my approach. I'm still extremely hopeful. I think the violence and the looting, that's always what people want to immediately dive in on and focus on. I'd rather focus on what's the cause of this stuff. Like, let's look at the systematic oppression. Let's look at how the system, whether it's the political system or, the police to law enforcement, let's look at these broken systems and fix those before we talk about people's violence. But in the case of violence, while I don't condone it, I think there always are periods of violence before there is real change. And when people are violent, that means they have exhausted all their options, all their resources of voicing their opinion, of voicing, how they're feeling and what's going on with them and how hurt they are. So now people are listening. Now people actually understand. For people to be looting, for people to be throwing chairs in windows and be literally destroying white business, Black business, any business, means people are desperate. People at an all-time high of being outraged. So I think honestly, this type of rage needs to happen in order for change to occur.
I think the anger is always validated because it's real, right? It's always valid because it's real, and that's an emotion that when it bubbles to the surface, it's coming from a genuine place. I was going to ask you about something you said in the Wall Street Journal article, though. I think it was you that said this, but I think one of the things you've learned in your life in studying the history is that peaceful civil disobedience always ends up having the most significant long-term impact.
Absolutely. I think the civil rights movement in the 60s was built on peaceful civil disobedience. That's exactly what those sit-ins were. When you see, the NAACP, or you would see Dr. King and all of his followers go and sit in a restaurant and sit there. They wouldn't fight back because they were peaceful, but they were disobeying the law because the law was that Blacks were not allowed to eat in these restaurants. You fast forward to nowadays, we actually saw in LA maybe a week or two ago, we saw protesters sitting in the street after their curfew. And that's peaceful civil disobedience. That's, I think, what Dr. King and Andrew Young and all these leaders would want to see now. And that's the way I think we do create change. So I think that's when you can channel your rage, when you can channel your anger, even though it's completely validated, when you can channel it and strategize and figure out what's the best way I can use this, and you turn to civil disobedience, I think that's when you're actually starting to win.
One of the things that people have sort of mentioned on whether social media or in articles that I've read, there's been a lot of posts and memes about this, but it's just the notion of this being a white person's problem, white people's problem. That white people were the people that have created this system, and for centuries, Black people have been saying the system is not advantageous to us. It's disadvantageous. We're being oppressed, and white people haven't listened, or maybe some have. But now it seems like a lot of white people are listening, and white people have to work with Black people to tear this system down. Would you agree with that this is as much of a white person's problem as it is a Black person's problem? Obviously not the oppression part, but in terms of solving this issue.
I think it's more of a white person's problem because white people are the ones that built this country. They built the structure. They built the system. And they have the leverage and they have the power. There's only so much. And we've seen Black people have exhausted all their resources. We can only do so much without having white allies. When we have white allies that have influence, that have power, that have voices that other powerful white people listen to, then that's when you make real change. But we need them to step on our side. We need those allies. So, of course, I think it is something that Black people have to handle. But there's, voting and, police reform, those only go so far. You have to have white people that are able to help us dismantle the system.
Do you have personally specific thoughts on reforms, police or otherwise, that you would like to see implemented?
I'm doing a lot of research on that. I'm watching carefully how this goes in Minneapolis. I saw that they disbanded the police department. I'm somewhere in between. I do think if you can have, in an ideal world, if you can have police that are there to protect and serve everybody on an equal level and provide justice and hold people accountable and hold themselves accountable, I think it could work out beautifully. But we get far from that. We don't have accountability. We have racial profiling, racial discrimination. We have all these things that are going on that target people of color. So police reform, I think, is great. People talk about defunding law enforcement, stuff like that, refocusing those funds towards, community centers, nonprofits that actually can do better with their, the specific services. I think that's an option, but I think it's deeper than that. I think you do for a lot of these corrupt, police departments in these cities, you do have to dismantle. You have to break it down, back down to the ground, and then rebuild it and retrain them to get out the racial bias, get out, there's a lot of stuff there's some stuff you're not going to be able to, but honestly, I think you can pick better ones. I think that's the key of rebuilding and dismantling the system. You retrain them and do all that, but you pick better people in those positions that are not racist, that are not going to honestly be killing people on the streets.
It's amazing that you have to say that. It really is.
Yeah. To actually spell that out. Yeah.
It's amazing. You mentioned this earlier. It will take years, potentially generations. I mean, there's so many underlying issues beyond just how police treat Black people. I've thought a lot about Tommy Smith and John Carlos and Malcolm. I'm sure you're familiar with their story. Yeah. They were sprinters for the U.S. men's Olympic team in 1968 in Mexico City. Tommy set a world record in the 200 meter, won the gold medal. John Carlos got the bronze medal. They get on the podium for the national anthem, and they put up their fist, wearing black gloves, and they went up without their shoes on. John Carlos had a necklace of sorts wrapped around his neck, which was protesting essentially lynching and police brutality. So I've thought a lot about them over the last couple of weeks, and it's like, that was 52 years ago, and you can say that things are marginally better for Black people in this country than they were then. This was 1968. It was 4 years after the Civil Rights Act was signed, but it's not good enough. It's not good enough. And there's still so much work to be done. And, I think in my own life, and Tommy, I probably speak for you on this too, but I know how active you are. I think a lot about not what I have done, but what I haven't done, if that makes sense. And so the question I guess I have for you is, what are you telling your white friends? What are you specifically saying to them about how they can help, and what does being a true ally actually look like?
So, one thing I've expressed to my white friends, TJ McConnell is actually the one that has reached out to me the most. He's really upset and really wants to help, and it's been great. He's been a true ally in this. But one thing I've said that I always want them to understand is this idea of white privilege. And whether or not you're a racist, and whether or not you look at a Black person and you think they're, less than you or inferior, whatever your thoughts are, even if you think they're equals, you have benefited from white privilege unknowingly. It's an unconscious. It's something that when you and a black man walk into a room together, you're going to get the benefit of the doubt more than he is if you do the same crime. You're going to do less time in prison than he is. So the white privilege is functioning for all white people. But that doesn't mean you're a bad person. That doesn't mean you're a racist. And that doesn't mean that you can't process that, understand it, and then help and become an ally. But the first thing I tell people is educate yourself. There's a documentary on Netflix. You might have checked it out. It's called 13.
Yeah, I've watched it a couple of times. I just rewatched it the other night. Yeah.
There's so much information in it. You have to rewatch it. Even for me, I had to rewatch it to pick up everything because there's so much. But I tell people to educate themselves. Go watch that documentary. That is one thing it's just about the criminal justice system, but then you start to really dig deep and understand how this system was built to oppress Black people years and years ago. This isn't something that, is just occurring right now or that we're just, seeing right now. Educate yourself and then become an ally. Don't sit silent. I think if you're silent, you're part of the problem. If you're doing nothing and all you're doing is posting on social media, I think you're part of the problem. I'm not a fan of people posting on social media. I'm not. I'm just over it. It's not. I don't think it's beneficial. I think it looks good and it appears good, but unless and I'm not saying white people need to be out there protesting with us. I think that's one way of helping the cause and being an ally.
Yeah.
Another is speaking out and just using your platform. That is really it, and lending your name and likeness to the Black community. Because I think when a lot of people look at this from the impression I've gotten from a lot of white people that I've talked to, they're uncomfortable with it. They're uncomfortable with going out there and protesting. They're uncomfortable with speaking out on it. They don't want to misspeak. They don't want to insult people. But really, I want everyone to understand is we need allies. We want help. And there is nothing to be uncomfortable about. This is something we are struggling with as a people. We're being killed in the streets, and we need everyone's help. And this actually isn't a problem that's ever going to be solved without white people.
Yeah.
You guys are the biggest ingredient to all this. And I just think people need to understand that and process that before they decide they're too uncomfortable to really deal with it or have tough conversations or take action.
Yeah. I think the notion of misspeaking though, and being afraid to misspeak is a real one.
Sure.
Nobody wants to be called out. Like your heart can be in the right place and you say the wrong thing. And we've seen it. I mean, Tommy and I have talked about a bunch of these things that have happened over the last couple of weeks. And I think there's some level of hesitancy to really participate in this conversation because white people may be scared to misspeak. I think that's valid.
I do too. I think that's completely valid, especially if you're not educated on the topic. If this is something, for me, I sort of put myself in a white person's shoes. If this is something that has never affected you and you've never had to deal with it, why would you actually understand it? You know what I'm saying? Why would you be paying attention to it if it's never affected you?
Sure.
But now that you do know, now that you do pay attention, you have to step out of your comfort zone. And talking about the issue and misspeaking is not something that just the white community has to deal with. You have a lot of people. President Obama, you have a lot of people that are criticized by the Black community when they get up there and they talk. I'm sure there are people in the Black community that criticize me because they disagree with things that I'm going to say. We all have different perspectives, no matter our race. So it's a risk that we're all taking when we get up and we speak about it. But it's something I think that is necessary because I think people are going to understand it. People are going to understand your heart, but also when you educate yourself before you get up and speak, you're way less likely to misspeak. You're way less. And if you have conversations with Black people and you're actually putting yourself out there to learn more and be educated, you're way less likely to misspeak and to offend people.
Do you guys feel like anecdotally, like Malcolm, like take your friends who are sort of like in the movement or like engage in this stuff on a daily basis, like take them out of it for a second. Do you feel like anecdotally this had the last 2 weeks and the real problems, which are, clear, obviously this is not only is it not a new thing, there's been countless books and movies and shows about this for decades and decades. Do you feel like this has cut through to white people in a way that it hasn't before?
I hope so. So what I have to say on that is I really hope so. I hope this is not a fleeting moment. I hope this is not a facade and something. I think people are touched, and I think people are starting to care, but I don't want the pandemic to be over and then people move on. And that's the fear for me. I think that's the fear for a lot of people in the Black community, is that because COVID is here, we have people's attention. These killings have been going on for hundreds of years, and no one has paid attention. But now that we have COVID and now that we have these things that have stopped time, now people are paying attention. So I want to encourage people to continue to push for policy change and continue to push, honestly, just for the Black community to have equal rights and to be treated fairly, even after COVID is gone, even after the world continues to sort of recover.
Well, one other thing I was going to bring up, speaking of Atlanta, and this isn't a police issue, but this happened on Tuesday on Election Day, is you see the disparity at voting stations in Black communities versus white communities in terms of length of time that these communities have to wait to vote. And so at basically every county in Georgia where it was sort of like a predominantly white county, it's like you get in and out, you're in and out in 10 minutes, you vote. And at some of these counties, especially in Atlanta, that are predominantly Black, there were these stories of people waiting there for 6 hours, 7 hours, like not even like, oh, it's 45 minutes, it's a little bit longer. There is a purposeful, there is a different, these people live in the same state and they are treated completely differently. And JJ and I talked about this a bunch, and we're going to have Stacey Abrams on at some point, who's obviously from down there, who's worked on this. But like in your perspective, when you're looking at these issues, how do we raise awareness about stuff like that? Because that is just as much a systemic problem as anything else.
Oh, completely. It's called voter suppression, and it's incredibly systemic. The earliest form of that voter suppression and silencing a Black person's voice and sort of their opinion on things was lynching. Lynching was the original way to instill fear, to instill hopelessness in Black people so that they did not push for their well-deserved human rights. And nowadays we see that in Georgia. Georgia historically is, one of the worst states in the country for voter suppression and denying Black people basically the right to vote, which is crazy to even think about in 2020. But we just saw a prime example of that. I think as for people that have platforms, the way you spread the message is talk about voting. The way you spread the message is do not get discouraged. Understand that this is part of the system. Understand what they're trying to do. And that's why we have to push harder. That's when you see voter suppression in these things, that's when you actually know how much voting matters and how much you can change the game with voting. I actually have seen LeBron launch this recent initiative called Maybe More Than a Vote. I think that's the name of it. But it's all about encouraging people to get out and vote. And that's what I think. I think it's all about that. And not just voting for the presidency, not just the top elections. Vote at the local level. Vote for prosecutors. Because, for example, prosecutors are the ones that are giving Black kids years and years in prison for having marijuana. Just completely unethical, immoral sentencings for Black people. So these are the local stuff. I think at the local level, voting is so important because these are the sort of people representing you in your community. These are the people that are actually going to have a direct impact on your kids and your family. So I really encourage people to vote locally, and of course, vote for the Obamas and all these people. But locally and at the state level is incredibly important.
Tommy, you're involved with this thing with LeBron, right?
Yeah,
you're helping them with it.
Yeah. I've been working with them to sort of build out the idea. I mean, the goal for it right now is basically to target the swing states and to target this exact issue, what you're talking about, Malcolm, in the swing states is raising awareness of voter suppression, predominantly in the Black community, but I think overall in these states, and basically make sure that the whole country knows what's going on, and that the way to your exact point, the way to fight this is to push through it. You have to know that basically there are elected officials in this country who don't want you to vote. They actively don't want you to vote. They will do everything to the point of lying about what day the election is so that you do not vote. They don't want you to vote by mail. Because they know that if you vote, they're out. It's like they don't want to stand on their policies. They would rather just suppress you from having the ability to do that. And so, I think all of us can do a version of this is basically just like, that's where the awareness comes in is when people know that they're like, well, that's bullshit, and they're going and they'll fight against it. And so, for me, and I mean, obviously I'm speaking to sort of two people that are the prime example of this. It's been inspiring how active so many guys in the league have been over the last 2 weeks. I mean, it's been everybody. And I know that the NBA has always been an organization where the players are sort of more outspoken and front facing and everything like that. But it really does seem like every team has had people protesting, has had people speaking out. Do you feel like to this point, specifically in the league, that this momentum is going to sort of keep up?
I mean, I would say yes, 100%. I mean, I've said this my whole career. Like, as proud as I am to be an NBA player and to be associated, with the fraternity of players, I'm prouder to be, in the fraternity as an NBA brother. Like, the people in our league, the players in our league have always done this to me. They've always done this. Maybe people didn't know about it 10 years ago prior to social media blowing up, but I've always, like, what NBA players have always done in their communities has always been amazing. And I've always been super proud to just be a part of this fraternity for sure. And that's why I'm like, we have become, and specifically, not myself, but we, meaning, Black NBA players have become so empowered in the last 5 or 6 years. This momentum is going to continue, no doubt. I have no doubt.
For sure. I think we're in a new age. I think back when, you look at the Jordan documentary, it was great, but it showed that Jordan and really very few players in the league took a stance on anything political or outside of basketball. And now LeBron has set the precedent, and it's going to be completely different now. He's going to speak out. He's going to, he has coined the slogan, more than an athlete, more than a basketball player, shut up and dribble, all that stuff. That is all predicated on the fact that we are not just basketball players. We have all these talents. We have all these other things we're interested in. And some of us are going to be interested in politics. Some of us are going to be smart enough to engage in them. I think this is something that will continue. I think the momentum is just the beginning. I think we're at the very, very beginning of this era of, players that are bold and players that are educated and players that want to make a bigger impact in the world and feel like, they have a duty to. So I think this is definitely the beginning of, honestly, something special, a new era of athletes.
Malcolm, do you have aspirations to one day run for office?
No, I don't know about that.
Wait, didn't they used to call you president? Didn't they used to call you President Brogdon or something? Was that your nickname at UVA?
Yeah. But, politics is another full-time job. And once I have a family, I'm really going to want to focus on my family. My vision for my life is, living part-time in Africa, traveling to Africa and traveling to Europe and all these places, year round, helping people with my foundation, clean water, education, all this other stuff. The goal hasn't been politics or to be a politician, but I do believe I have a master's in public policy. I do believe policy is the way that you create change at the highest level. And to do that, you need to be a senator. You need to be educated. You need to hold one of these high-profile positions. So I'm not ruling it out, but that's not the goal for me.
If somebody nudges you in the right way, I could see it happening. I could see it happening for sure.
Mayor of Atlanta. Start with the mayor of Atlanta, governor of Georgia, maybe one day, who knows?
And then move up. Yeah.
You mentioned some of the stuff you're doing in Africa. Could you just explain to the listener what Hoops 2.0 is and what you guys are doing over there?
For sure. So 2 years ago, I started a water initiative called Hoops 2.0 that's based in Tanzania. And basically, we build clean water wells in remote villages and areas of Tanzania for people that don't have clean water. It's a huge issue in everywhere but America and first world countries that people don't have clean water. They don't have food to eat consistently. They don't have all these things. But for me, clean water has sort of been my calling card and something that I'm super interested in and helping provide. So over the past 2 years, we raised around $700,000. I have about 7 or 8 other NBA players on the team. I'm constantly recruiting. One of our goals is to have one player on every team. But yeah, we fundraise all year, and now we're expanding it. We're having far more partnerships. That was under another foundation. Now I'm bringing Hoops 2.0 under my foundation. And we're about to expand it. We're about to have all these partnerships. And, now we're going to actually add an education component. So, originally we were building the wells and villages. Now, under my foundation, we're going to actually build wells around schools. And then those schools that we do it, we're actually going to target that school and help them with the infrastructure, whether they need a new kitchen, whether they need, writing utensils, pencil and paper, whether they need new toilets, stuff like that. We're also going to have a program that builds courts where we can teach the kids basketball, we can run clinics. So it's sort of an all-in-one approach. And we're going to expand it all over Africa. We have places mapped out: Rwanda, Mali, Nigeria, Kenya, I think I already said Mozambique. So we have a bunch of places that we're building relationships in where we're going to have these projects. And then we're also going to have an education component in the U.S. where we focus on 3 to 4 charter schools in Indianapolis, 3 to 4 charter schools in Atlanta. And we basically have a mentoring program and a literacy program in each of those schools in each city. So it's, I wanted to do something international because that's where my heart is, especially in Africa. But also I feel like it's important seeing the need in these inner cities, especially Indianapolis and Atlanta. The kids and that next generation needs help. So I want to be here to provide it domestically as well.
That's amazing. Is there a website, social media handle, or something like that people can go to if they want more information on this?
The website will be up, and because I don't have the website up, the foundation we are taking off. The foundation will take off, I think, the first week of July.
Okay,
we're working on it a lot right now,
right.
And building a lot. But I'm going to be posting on my social media in the next couple of weeks, sort of amping up so people understand what's going on.
That's amazing. And correct me if I'm wrong, there's a group of UVA guys that are working on this with you. Justin Anderson, maybe Joe is in on it with you. I think Chris Long is doing maybe something that he's partnering with you on, or something separate.
So Chris is doing, I was under Chris's foundation, and he had Water Boys, which was for the NFL. Yeah. And now I'm moving the basketball side, Hoops 2.0, over to my foundation.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Very cool. I want to talk a little bit of basketball with you because we haven't really touched on anything related to your career. But I wanted to tell a story. I don't know if you remember this. The very first time I ever met you was after the Clippers and Bucks played your rookie year, and I came over to you in the hallway and I was like, "Hey man, I just want to let you know that for the 2 months leading up to the draft, I was telling everybody in the Clippers front office that we should draft you at 25.
Yeah. And I remember when you told me that. And I remember thinking, man, y'all should have, man. I would have loved to come.
Oh my God. You would have been perfect for us.
I feel like you told a lot of people that. You were like, JJ was like your biggest fan before the draft.
It's an ACC connection. That's all.
I've always been a big Malcolm fan, man. Yeah, I've always been a big Malcolm fan. It's amazing. So you went 36, is that right?
Yeah.
So we actually had 2 chances to draft him because we had the 33rd pick too. What the fuck?
It's a good what. That's a good what if. Another Clippers what if you were on that team.
So you get rookie of the year. I think it was the first second round pick since 1965 or something like that. Something crazy like that to get rookie of the year. Was this all related to the foot injury that you had previously had? Were you did you get red flagged or something at the combine? Like what was the issue that you dropped that far?
So I went to so I knew the Pacers loved me. From day one, the Pacers loved me. Larry Bird loved me. And he basically had been talking to my agent about it. And, we really like him. We might draft him. He came to the combine, so I played really, really well. First day, the scrimmages, I was the talk of the combine. Because, a lot of the top guys now, they just sit out. They were sitting out. I had a great first day. I was, debating whether or not to sit out. because Larry Bird had called and was like, look, we're going to draft. We're going to take him. He doesn't have to work out for everybody. We're going to take him.
What pick did they have?
21.
Okay.
So they had 21. He was like, we're going to take him at 21. We're sold. A few days before the draft, we get a call, and the Pacers medical teams looked into my foot injury I had my freshman year at Virginia in college, and they were like, we can't take him. He's had this injury. It's something that if the surgery doesn't hold up, we know it's held up for 3 or 4 years, but if it doesn't hold up, we would be surprised if it held up for another year or two. So we have to pass him. Then we were going down the line. Charlotte had 22, and he was like, and David Falk was like, you're never going to get past that. Michael's my guy, 1, but 2, Michael loves you. They're going to take you. I got red flagged by their medical team. Toronto had 27. They were like, Masai loves you. The coach there, Casey loves you there. It's a great system, a winning system. You're built for that. Bam, they passed me because they hear about it. Then they're like, because we'd always been talking to the Warriors and the Spurs. We thought the Spurs was a perfect fit. That's the team I wanted to go to my whole life. Boom, one of them red flags me at 29. The other one red flags me at 30 because they both were like, he's not going to be here when the draft comes around. They both red flag me. Then I can fall to the Lakers at like 32 or the Suns at 34, and they both really want me. And my agent basically convinces them not to take me. So he's like, it's a bad situation. You can go to Milwaukee. You can compete for the starting job with the Bucks. You have a good chance at getting it, but it's also Jason Kidd. He's a point guard. You have a chance to really learn from him. It's a building team. You could grow with them. That's where we want you to go. So he had me fall to the 6th pick in the 2nd round. After, it was, I wasn't going to be drafted in the 1st round. So that was like the last 3 days leading up until the draft. And even on draft night, I remember they all red flagged me. I was sitting there. I was so angry, sitting there watching the draft, watching all these guys go in front of me. And we got to the 2nd round, and my agent was like, I'm going to try to get the Bucks to draft you. He was on the phone with the Bucks, and they were like, we're not worried about his foot, but we're not sure we want him. And my agent basically had to convince them to take me. He was like, look, I'm doing you a favor. He's going to be really good. Just take him. Like, I'm doing you guys a favor. Greg Monroe had recently re-signed that year. He had a player option. He stayed there. And he was like, look, I brought you guys back, Greg. Like, just take Malcolm. Do me this favor. So they took me. And even though they didn't want me, and, it ended up working out pretty well.
I think it's Draymond said that he can name he was a 2nd round pick too. He can name every guy drafted in front of him. Do you hold that type of anger? Could you do that?
I think you have to hold at least some of that anger. I can name basically everybody. I can remember every team that was supposed to take me that said, we love him and we want him at this pick, and they passed me. I can name everybody they took from 1 to 30. I can name everybody. And it's not something that I'm caught up on or I think about, because I'm going to end up playing for some of these teams. Indiana passed me. I'm playing for Indiana. But it's something that motivates you, and it keeps everything in your mind as an NBA player. You have to keep things realistic. They don't love you. They love you for the time that you're there. They love you for, before you get injured. They love you for all this time. But once they find a better option, you're going to be gone, and that next person's going to come in. So you have to keep that motivation in your mind to stay hungry.
You do, because look, you have to maximize sort of every situation that you're going to be in. And I understood, when I went to Philly, I was on a very different timeline than Joel and Ben.
Right.
I knew, best case scenario, it might have been 3-4 years that I could be there. It just, there was no way. I knew those guys were going to grow and they were going to build around those guys, and I was going to age out. I was okay with that. And so my whole thing was, I'm going to just dive in and maximize while I'm here and do this. I wanted to ask you about leaving Milwaukee. Because for both of us, we lost to the Raptors in the playoffs. We lose a gut-wrenching game in Game 7 on Kawhi's 12-bounce fall-away jumper. we're so close. You can we were so close. We would have played you guys, obviously, but then you guys go up 2-0. You lose in 6 games. When you get that close, taking the money out of it, because for me it was an economic choice, but taking the money out of it, how difficult is it to leave something when you're that close?
Well, man, there's so much that went into that decision. Not only were we so close, and I felt like we were so close and on the verge of having the type of season they're having this year and possibly win a championship, you're leaving a situation for the first time in the NBA. You've never, and you've been on a few teams, you know what it's like to, for the first time, to pick up and move. You're like, oh man, I'm moving to a different city. I have to reestablish myself. I have to do all these things. Like it's a big deal. It's a giant jump for you and whoever's with you. So it's sort of getting over that hurdle and making that decision, that was extremely tough. And then on top of it, leaving a system that works perfectly and leaving somewhere where you fit in and you had a very good role. So it was definitely when you leave a situation like that, you got to make sure you're leaving for the right reasons and make sure you're leaving for something better, or at worst as good, which I feel like I got.
And why do you feel like it was as good or better? Just because of, obviously you got a great contract, but in terms of your role on the court and just being able to facilitate a little more? Yeah.
Absolutely. Take the money out of it. I was playing shooting guard with the Bucks. I enjoy playing shooting guard, but scoring is not my main thing on the court. That's actually not what I want to do first. That's not my first option. I want to get guys involved. I want to win. I feel like I'm a winner above everything else, and I compete on both ends. And Indiana brings the best out of me when you look at those, what I just talked about. And putting me in the point guard position, it allows me to play in my role, in my position, and lead. I think the point guard has to be, if not the leader, has to be one of the biggest leaders on your team. He has to be vocal. He has to demand respect. And that's what I feel like I bring to the game and I bring to my team. And now I'm in that role where the Pacers say, look, we're giving you the ball. We're giving you, the point guard role. Just go do it. Let's win some games. Play with our all-star Victor Oladipo and Miles and our other all-star Domas. Like, go play with these guys. We got a talented team. Lead and go win games. And that's what they've done with me. And I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been great.
Does it feel like to you like the Pacers are still always under the radar? Like always, like nobody ever talks. All they do is win. I mean, yeah, they're not the 1 seed. They're not the Bucks this year, but all they do is win consistently, and they never get talked about.
Always, the Pacers are a team that is built on discipline. Even more than Milwaukee. Milwaukee was a disciplined team, but we were so talented. We had, arguably the best player in the NBA. I mean, we had a great coach. Indiana has a great coach, but ours is built on discipline and defense and all these sort of gritty sort of characteristics that I actually had from college. So it's a way better fit for me. And then we have guys that are hungry. Everybody on this team is hungry. We have a bunch of underdogs, guys that know we're underestimated. We play hard every night and we pride ourselves on that. So, that's something I actually, every time I step on the floor, we may not win every game, but I know me and my guys are going to compete. So, that's something I look forward to every single night.
Brett Brown, my coach with Philly, he would always say, you guys were vanilla, but you did vanilla really well. Like there was just, you know what I mean? Like there's nothing like your defensive schemes, you're going to stick to it and you're going to do your defensive schemes really well. Like we know your rotations, but you're going to run them as well as anybody in the league. There's nothing you can do about that. You're not going to make the adjustment. You're going to do your vanilla. Same thing with offense.
There's nothing flashy. And we're not really going to adjust. You're going to have to beat us at what we do.
Yeah.
And if you beat us that night, you beat us. But we're not going to beat ourselves. And we're going to stick to what our game plan was for that game.
Yeah. Last year you had a 50, 40, 90 year, which is incredible. First of all, I think not 9 guys maybe have done it in the NBA history. How much did the mental part wear on you as the season wore down? Like, were you cognizantly aware of that game to game of like what your percentages were? And if you had a bad shooting game, were you?
You know how it is.
You're
do. You're the greatest. You're one of the greatest.
No, I've never had a 50, 40, 90.
It's like when you realize how well you're doing, or you realize how well you're shooting the ball, it starts wearing on you. You realize you actually start to see people waiting for you to miss, people waiting for you to, your stats to drop. And it's sort of messed up how people think like that, but that's the reality of it. And then it creeps into your mind to where you're not as focused on playing good basketball and playing at a high level. Because that's when we're at our best, we're actually not thinking out there. Everything is rhythm. Everything is fluid. But then when you realize how well you're playing and how well you're shooting the ball, then you actually start thinking about it. And the moment you start thinking on the court is the moment you're actually going to start, dropping.
I feel like when I have like runs, 6-7 games where I'm shooting really well, like I'm not thinking, but then at some point it like clicks in and you're like, oh man, I'm shooting 51% from three the last 8 games. And you're like, fuck, why did I tell myself that? The thing that always messes me up. So for my career, I think I'm like 89.1 something from the free throw line. Yeah. So I've had a bunch of years where I'm like 89.7 or 90.1. Where you're like hovering around that. It's like, you're still a good free throw shooter, but for some reason, like 90%, on free throws and 40% on threes, like those are the numbers. And when you're like just on the cusp, it's like a game to game mental struggle.
It's like an extra stressful stress in your mind.
Yeah.
How far into the season before you guys start looking at that? Like, is it December? Like what's the cutoff where you're like, all right, now I'm going to start paying attention?
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, like, for me, it's like I don't really worry until like 2 months into the season. Because I've had some seasons where I started off horrible. I had my 5th year in Orlando. I think I started the year 3 for 25 from 3. From the first 2 months of last year in Philly, I shot like, I think 31 or 32% from 3. Like I was low 30s. I ended up shooting 39.7, just under 40. So for me, I don't really worry about it for the first 2 months.
Yeah. No, that's how I am. I'm not nearly as good of a shooter as you, but I'm not worrying about it for a while because the season's so long. You're going to shoot it so many times. You have to give yourself time to make up if you had a cold start. And that's when you start paying attention. So it's at least 2 months before I really start watching and paying attention to it.
Malcolm, I really appreciate your time, man. You've been an awesome guest. Thank you so much. Thank you for just being open and lending your incredible perspective on all things. And hopefully, I'll see you in a few weeks if you don't bail on Orlando.
For sure. Thank you for having me. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, appreciate it, man.